Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital closed its doors on September 1st, 1979. Its historic buildings, originally built by patient labor, were abandoned and begun to deteriorate. Over the years, they were even threatened with complete demolition and redevelopment. Before the era of so-called psychiatric moral management, mental health patients, not yet even branded as such, but simply known as lunatics, were a source of social ridicule rather than compassion and empathy. The former Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital in its full institutional glory. The cottages look like prisons, and there is nothing that would remind one of home. Quite the opposite. The buildings, especially the ones that are awaiting much-needed renovations, resemble prisons for criminals.
My name is Ed Januszewski. I used to work at Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital. I was hired, that was my first job in 1974 in the fall, and I worked there until it closed in 1979. My work there was as an occupational instructor. What I was expected to do was to be a glorified supervisor of contract work that was brought into the hospital. I remember when I first arrived at the hospital, it was kind of ominous, a very large series of buildings. They were starting to look quite run down. The impression was of a place that, while the landscape was beautiful, it was still a bit foreboding. The building I was working in was in one of the modern buildings called the Trades Building. It had recently been built specifically to work as a small factory. The grounds were the highlight of the area. One of my first impressions of the place, what I didn't realize at the time that I started working there, is that the buildings and the grounds were being kept up by the patients themselves. In fact, in the 1880s, when it was being built, patients from the Provincial Lunatic Asylum, as they called it, now Queen Street Mental Health Center, the patients were transported there daily to work on the farms that were near the property and to help build and construct the actual cottages at the Lakeshore property. I was encouraged to look at the research of the cemetery in particular after speaking with the Psychiatric Survivor Archives group. This group is interested in the contributions of the patients and hold records that the patients have created themselves. In creating a database of those 1,500 or more patients that are buried at the Evans and Horner Avenue Cemetery, I learned something more about their backgrounds. I appreciated that these people were actually the early pioneers of Toronto, Ontario, and indeed Upper Canada.
It has been 26 years since the former Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital closed its doors. Since then, the former psychiatric patients and survivors and the general public have started to help preserve the memory of the former patients. What was praised then in terms of medical practices is now shunned upon, and your friendly neighborhood asylum does not seem to be as progressive and as modern as before. Nowadays, the local community and the whole city remember that these buildings must tell their stories, that they must somehow retell the human suffering that they've witnessed.